we are motivating those young people and getting them excited now as well, because when we retired the space shuttles in 2011, we still had the International Space Station to support, and we were sending Americans to the International Space Station, but they were riding on a Russian rocket. They were riding on the Soyuz rocket. And now SpaceX, with the Crew Dragon and the Falcon 9 vehicle, are carrying our astronauts from American soil once again up to the International Space Station. So we had an expression early in the Space Shuttle program that was launch fever, catch it.
Go fever.
And I think we are catching launch fever once again, because we can go to Cape Canaveral and we can watch American rockets launching Americans into space once again.
Exciting time.
Yes. And so 18 years at NASA, and then it was time to come back to your hometown, which
Right.
is where Hoot Gibson's hangar, the building that we're in right now. So thank you for being with us on Hoot Gibson's hangar.
Good to be here. Thank you.
SpaceX Dragon, go for launch.
SpaceX
T-minus
reports
30
go. Crew reports go. 30 seconds until liftoff.
T-minus 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition. Engines full power. And liftoff. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
Vehicle is pitching downrange. Stage 1 propulsion is nominal.
We're now at T plus 35 seconds into the 5th rotational crew mission on board Dragon and Falcon 9.
Nominal power and telemetry.
Coming up in just a few seconds, we'll hear the call out for Stage 1 throttle down.
Stage 1 throttle down.
Falcon 9 engines throttling down to help pass through the period of maximum dynamic pressure.
This period is known as max Q, and once the vehicle... There we just heard that the vehicle is now traveling faster than the speed of sound. Once through max Q, we'll throttle those Merlin engines back up.
Max Q. Stage 1 throttle up. Stage 1 throttle.
Stage 1 Bravo.
Copy 1 Bravo.
You were supposed to be the 3rd American woman to space, but because of delays in the program, you wound up being the 5th. So all of that trouble is out of the way, and the flight went off smoothly without a hitch, with nothing unusual whatsoever, right?
No.
Well, what
We
happened?
had 2 fairly simple satellites that we had on board. And it came time to deploy the satellite. I pushed the button, and it rolled out of the cargo bay like it was supposed to, but then as it drifted away, and it didn't spin, and it had an antenna on the top that was supposed to pop up so the ground could send some commands, and that didn't happen. And then we were told how to create this sort of thing that made our stick look like a fly swatter. And, we thought, oh, please, Lord, let us be able to do this. But we did the best we could do. It did not turn the satellite on.
Did you actually flip the switch? You caught the switch a number of
I
times.
caught it a number of times
with the fly
but it
swatter.
didn't turn it on.
It was already flipped all the way open. But there were those on the ground that were saying, I don't think this is going to work. I don't think she'll be able to do it.
Right.
Um,
Yep.
But you
And
did.
I did it.
You did, didn't you?
I did it.
Well, you had a distinguished career as an astronaut, and then you moved on.
Well, there were other things that happened in my life,
Well, such as what?
such as we got married. So that was kind of nice. We had known each other for quite a while, and we got married, and then we had a baby. When he was born, there was a great deal of news that 2 astronauts had had a baby, and he was dubbed the world's first astronaut. So we thought that was kind of a cool thing to say. One of the newspaper folks made that up. So Paul takes great pride in being the world's first astronaut. There were babies born to other astronauts later on, but Paul feels like he was the first.
Any other kids? Did you have any other kids along the way?
I did. I had Dan a few years later after that. And, it was a challenge to be a working mom. And we were really lucky with the first child. We sort of toughed it out and had girls from the preschools help us out and everything. But with the second baby, we just thought, this is crazy. We're going to have to do something about it. And I sort of asked friends and maybe my cleaning lady, did they know anybody that would like to be a nanny for us? We had a nice house that would let us have a nanny suite downstairs. And Joyce, the lady that was cleaning our house, one day rang the doorbell and opened the door, and here was a nice older lady, and she said, "This is Joanne Powell. She's interested in perhaps being a nanny for you." And I said, "Well, come on in and let me ask you some questions. If you're going to have somebody come live with you, you want to ask them all kinds of questions." And I asked her, did she smoke? I asked her several other questions, and she answered them, yes, no, yes, no. And I said, "Okay, do you have any other questions?" And I had Dan, and I was holding him and patting him on the back because he was just a little baby. And when I asked Joanne, "Do you have any other questions?" she said, "Yes, ma'am. May I hold that baby?" And, of course, that sold her. She loved babies. She'd had 5 of her own. So, she was wonderful. And she lived in our house. She did, some of the laundry. She could babysit the kids. She cooked for us when we needed her to. But she was just there for us. And that was one of those things that, for a working mom, it was just wonderful to have somebody like that in her house. And Joanne ended up living with us for 25 years.
All the way through Dan and one more baby, right? There was another baby that came along.
Emily.
Yes, your daughter.
It's my daughter.
Yes, that's who I was referring to.
Yes. So we had a third baby.
Emily was born about 3 weeks before my final mission in 1995. And so people ask us about our flights in space, and I tell them that I got to go to space 5 times. You got to go to space 3 times, but you had 3 children along the way. So you had 6 total missions, and I only had 5.
Well, and I can remember Emily was a teeny tiny baby for your last flight. And here we are sitting in the viewing room in Mission Control, and I've got a baby on my shoulder, And so that was kind of interesting. We have pictures of that, but, many happy memories of all those babies, and they're all grown-up people now.
And so 18 years at NASA, and then it was time to come back to your hometown, which is where Hoot Gibson's hangar is located now.
As I recall, you were not terribly happy about moving back to Tennessee, being a California boy, but you followed me here, so I appreciated that.
Well, your background in the life sciences, in medicine, must have given you some ability to look at some of the future plans of NASA and ponder or wonder about the ability of humans to handle long-term stays in space, travel to distant planets and things like that. Tell us some of your thoughts about going to Mars or about long-term stays in space.
Well, I really, when I was assigned to the 2 life sciences Space Lab missions, I really knew that this was something that I had a background in. I was going to have to learn from the scientists who proposed the experiments because they were, of course, experts in those areas. But there were things that we had found out early on. There was an early Skylab flight that was kind of a big canister, and they had done some very simple experiments, looking at bone loss, muscle loss, vestibular problems, ear problems, getting around. But the life sciences missions were proposed by scientists from all over the country. They had to be experiments that could be done in space. They answered special questions that we were interested in. And so there was a big request for proposals from scientists from all over the world. So that sort of made it important that we understood what they were looking for, how the experiments needed to be done. We had to learn about all of the equipment that they put on board, because if the equipment didn't work, we weren't going to get the results back. So the first life sciences flight, we trained with the scientists. They had what was called a payload operations control center, like the mission ops, so we could get information from the scientists from the ground if things weren't working right. We had to know what we were looking for. We had to be able to recognize when something important just happened, but it was not what we expected. We had to learn how to fix all of the equipment when we were on board, and there was lots of experiment equipment on board. And it would fail periodically for a variety of reasons. And we had a huge malfunctions checklist because, if you couldn't do the experiments, the flight was really not going to be a very good success.
So what are some of the conclusions that were arrived at? What are some of the challenges about long-term stays in space and about things like traveling to Mars?
Well, of course, when you're traveling in space, you're weightless. And the body reacts to that because when you walk around here on the ground, you're putting some stress on your bones. When you're in space and floating, your bones don't need to be that strong, and they react. They lose calcium. So we were collecting all our urine to see how much calcium we were eating. We had to record our diets. We were also worried about, you don't use your muscles as much in zero gravity. So they were very interested in understanding muscle protein was lost. So we had to look at that. We did some muscle biopsies, stuck a needle in and took some samples of muscle. There were a number of things. They were looking very much at the vestibular system, the inner ear, because when you're in space, your inner ear, here on the ground, the inner ear says, that's down, that's up. You're going sideways, you're turning around. In space, the inner ear gets really confused. And so that wasn't that much of a problem when you're floating around in the space lab, but if you're landing the space shuttle and you turn your head and everything starts to move funny, they were worried about the pilots getting disoriented a little bit when they went on the ground. The other funny thing, when you get done with your flight and you come down the steps of the orbiter, they sort of held on to you because they knew you were kind of rocky. And of course, if you'd been in space for a week or two, the first thing you wanted to do, of course, after eating a cheeseburger, was to have a shower because you had just been sort of toweling off. So they would take you into a shower, and there's a chair in there, and they said, sit down in the chair. Don't get up, because if you get soap in your eyes and stand up, you'll try to fall down. So you had to take your first shower, which felt wonderful, sitting down in a chair, but it was just, oh, this is glorious. Yeah.
So, what are the medical concerns about going to Mars?
Oh gosh, for Mars, it's probably pretty much the same things. It's bone loss, muscle loss, vestibular problems. The eyes don't track as well, and of course you have communication problems because going to Mars, it takes a long time to communicate. When we're in Earth orbit, we can ask the ground a question, they come right back with the answer. When you're going to Mars, what does it take? 30 minutes to get the voice down and then 30 minutes to get it back? If you have an emergency, that's too long to wait to hear from the ground. So you have to be much more self-sufficient. What do you remember about other going to Mars problems? Of course, it's, how does the vehicle get there? How do you get there in a reasonable amount of time? How do you get back home? So, there's a whole different problem. And of course, Mars is what, 1/3 gravity?
1/3 gravity.
So, when you step out, you only have a little bit of gravity. On the moon, all of us sort of remember seeing those first moon landings, and that's 1/7 gravity, and you can kind of hop around. But we don't know much about 1/3 gravity. So,
well, and a trip to Mars could take as long as 8 months to get there and 8 months to get back. And so things like bone loss and changes in the blood or any of those other things that could be occurring for a long time.
Right. And food. Do you carry all the food up for, several months, or do you grow it there? There's questions about the nutrition in space. What do you take? So it's just a whole different thing. I'm glad they're going to go to the moon and live there for a while. Learn about a habitat, learning what kind of materials are there that are useful to you. Is there water under the surface? Is there something you can use for fuel? So I think that going to the moon is sort of a part way. And of course, the first flights are going to go, and a spaceship is going to orbit the moon, and then they're going to send people down to build a habitat. So we're just taking it one step at a time, but it makes it so interesting to know what the plans are and why they're doing it that way.
This is the SLS rocket you're referring
Right.
to, the Space Launch System, which is larger than the Saturn V and will give us the ability to go back to the moon and land Americans on the moon once again. And as you mentioned, establish a crew base there on the moon, learn what the pitfalls are, learn how to operate in looking down the road towards going to Mars.
Absolutely.
Haven't we had several fairly long-term stays in space aboard the International Space Station?
We have.
In view of looking at, is there a way that we can battle some of these things like the bone
Right.
loss and the other things
Right.
that happen? Haven't we had some of those?
We have. They develop better gym equipment. I think they've been growing some things that might be useful to eat. They're doing quite a number of things to look at long-term spaceflight. Of course, they have to look at radiation. That's one of those scary things when you're outside the magnetosphere of the Earth and you get out further, the radiation can be damaging. And it's one of those things that you don't want to come back with your chromosomes all messed up. So they're doing quite a few studies of that in long duration.
We had Scott Kelly stay up there for nearly a year, I think 340 days.
Right.
And we just landed another astronaut who had been up for, I think the number was 355 days.
Mm-hmm.
So we are studying. We are studying the
Absolutely.
long-term effects of it to convince ourselves that between an exercise regimen and some medication as well, that we can battle the bone loss and battle the things that we're nervous about.
But certainly the radiation protection as we get further out and people stay there longer. You don't want your chromosomes to get messed up, your genes to get messed up. And we haven't quite figured out what's the best way to shield against radiation. So lots of interesting questions coming down the road for scientists to look into and to solve. And, I think everybody, even when they play a small part in the space program, they're very proud of that, having done it before. You and I meet people that tell us about, I did this and I did that. We thank them all for the contributions that they have made to the space program, because we kind of feel like we're all part of the same family. If we were interested in that, got a chance to work in that.
Well, nowadays, we are eagerly looking forward to the SLS rocket. Mm-hmm. And the SLS rocket will go around the moon. It's going to go out, I think, 40,000 miles away from Earth. 40,000 miles beyond the moon is where it's going to go. It's going to orbit the moon for a while and then come back. This first flight will be unmanned. There won't be anybody in it. But Artemis, and that being Artemis 1. Artemis 2 is going to be a manned flight that's going to orbit the moon, but not land. And then Artemis 3 is going to be the first landing of Americans on the moon again at that point. And looking towards developing that moon base that you were talking about and that outpost facility to figure out what kind of things we need to know to establish a base like that on Mars as well. I think I'm seeing a lot of excitement within NASA because these things are coming their way, and yeah, it is an exciting time. And of course, we have had the International Space Station up in orbit for a great many years now. I think the first parts of it went up in 1998 or 1999, and so we have had Americans in space for a long, long time. But now we have another rocket that's been flying, that's been carrying our astronauts to the International Space Station. Can you talk about that a little bit? The SpaceX rocket. SpaceX, of course.
Of course. Well, I think all of us would like the idea that there are private companies that would like to contribute and be a part of this. And, it's fun to see how they're going to do it. I think we were all worried about, NASA was so focused on safety that we wanted to make sure that the commercial folks are doing the same. But, it seems to be working out quite well. And it's nice that NASA doesn't have to fund everything going to space, that there are other companies that are involved in that. One of the things that I really would like to talk about was, when you and I were growing up, there was so much excitement about the space program. I mean, you and I can remember when we were just beginning the space program, the Mercury and Gemini flights and everything. And one of the things that really promoted was that young people thought that they might someday be involved in the space program. And a lot of those students went into science, technology, engineering, and medicine, hoping that they could someday be a part of that. And I think we need that kind of excitement now, that the kids need to think, people are going to go into space. I might get to go if I study the right things, study hard, and do well. Maybe I could be a NASA engineer, or I could be a NASA astronaut. And I think that's one of the things that we really need for our young people to be excited about. You and I know several young people who have talked to us about, what's it going to take? What do I need to study? Would it be best for me to do this or that? And, we tell them to follow their dream, but to find something that they are very interested in, and maybe someday they'll get involved in the space program.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.